What's up, everybody? All right, Trent, you got to be quiet now. With the stream has officially started. What's up, guys? Welcome to Capturing Christianity. Things are a little bit different tonight. As you can see, we're not using Google Hangouts anymore. I've got my own stream going, but tonight we're discussing what the proper epistemology is for religion. We're going to be discussing what that term means. If you don't know what it means, then you're probably on the wrong channel. Talking epistemology, religion, justification, knowledge. Epistemology is basically the study of justification, the study of knowledge. So in other words, we're discussing religious belief and whether it counts as knowledge, or under what conditions it could be said to count as knowledge. My two guests are Tom Jump, as many of you know, and Dr. Trent Dougherty. Tom has appeared on the show before. Back in March, he debated Dr. Josh Rasmussen. These aren't really debates, they're more like discussions, but they were talking about whether or not there's any evidence for God, which is a really interesting discussion. The link to their discussion is in the description of this video if you want to watch it after this one. Tom is an atheist. He believes there are no good reasons to think that God exists. He's debated several apologists and philosophers, religious thinkers over the past few months on his YouTube channel. And the link to his channel, if you want to watch his discussions on his channel, that's also in the description. Dr. Trent Dougherty, he is new to the channel. Is that how you pronounce your name? Dougherty? Dougherty will do. Okay. Okay, Dougherty. All right, that's easier. So Dougherty is a writer and entrepreneur who lives in Waco, Texas, having earned his PhD in mathematical linguistics at the University of Rochester. He has held research positions at Notre Dame, St. Andrews, Oxford, and he retired with tenure from Baylor University in 2018. He has 5 children, and he and his wife make their home next to a ranch where they build trails and cultivate wildflowers. So if you guys are new to Capturing Christianity, I host debates like this or live discussions once a month around there. Eventually, I'd like to do more of these, but that's basically what we do. If you want the link to our past discussions, check the link in the description of the video. It's real easy to find. And with that, let's go ahead and just jump right into the discussion. Let me change scenes here. All right, we are ready to go. So the topic is, again, what is the proper epistemology for religion? So who'd like to go first?
When taken together, the cumulative case adds up to nothing in my viewpoint. The reason I believe none of the arguments indicate a God is that human knowledge is tentative provisional progression, like counting. We start with 0 knowledge and we add new knowledge, like counting upwards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, we can't ever say we've reached the biggest number. It's not an option. It's not even a potential candidate option, because there's nothing within any form of human knowledge that can justify a stopping point for truth, which there couldn't just be some greater truth beyond it. We just don't have a way to establish a stopping point for truth like a biggest number or a no supernatural. You could only ever say something like, given what we currently know, there is currently no reason to believe in the supernatural. Use the tentative evidence of given what we currently know to justify a tentative conclusion, there is currently no reason to believe. However, you could not say, given what we currently know, there is absolutely no supernatural, because it's a contradiction. The statement we currently know is tentative and only applies to the known things, whereas the statement there is absolutely no is absolute and applies to all of the things, including those in the unknown category that aren't in the tentative category. So we can use the tentative evidence of given what we know to justify the tentative conclusion of we currently have reason to believe X, but you can't use the tentative evidence of given what we currently know to justify the absolute conclusion there is absolutely no. There is absolutely no supernatural as a stopping point for truth, which we can't justify with any form of human knowledge. It's like claiming that the natural world is the biggest number. And this same logic applies to a God. For example, take the claim God is by definition not created, or there is only one God, there is no super God. This claim fails for the exact same reason as metaphysical naturalism, the claim there is only the natural and no supernatural. Even if we had as much evidence for a God as we do for the natural world, that would not show God was not created by another greater God for the exact same reason. There could always be another greater God out there we just haven't discovered yet. This applies to all of the metaphysical omni properties of a God, which I call stopping points for truth, like all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, eternal, necessary, divine aseity, pure actuality, perfect simplicity. There could always be a God out there that is more powerful, more knowledgeable, or more good, etc. This is, of course, also due to the problem of induction and underdetermination, which are only two examples of such problems which exist in every form of human knowledge to show that no form of human knowledge can justify those kinds of stopping points for truth. In epistemology, we have the problem of the criterion, Agrippa's trilemma, the problem of the universals, the problem of easy knowledge. In math, we have Gödel's incompleteness theorem 2, Tarski's indefinability theorem in logic. Moral knowledge, we have the open question argument and the fact-value distinction, which apply to both natural and supernatural sources. So claiming that anything has any of these omni properties is like arguing this thing is the biggest number, and that can't be supported with any form of human knowledge, making such a claim an unsupported. Justified by human knowledge. This is why science and most secular philosophies don't make these kinds of absolutist claims. So my argument goes like this. It's all forms of human knowledge only allow for tentative additions like counting upwards. Absolute omni properties are like arguing for a biggest number or a biggest truth. No amount of human knowledge can indicate a biggest truth. God has omni properties. God is not supported by any form of human knowledge. So in my view, we should do away with anything that has omni properties, which I refer to as top-down worldviews, and only make claims of tentative additions to human knowledge, which I call bottom-up worldviews like science. Because omni properties are de facto infinites, they can be used to solve any and all potential problems. A bridge of infinite length can span any chasm. So you can add these to any hypothesis like the multiverse and make it all-powerful, making it a kind of naturalistic pantheism, to solve all of the problems in physics and get the multiverse to have equal explanatory power and scope as theism. And you can do this with the flying spaghetti monster, or deism, or polytheism, pantheism, transtheism, dicetheism, anything you want. So if we allow omni properties, anything theology can answer, so can naturalistic science or any of those other things I listed. If we don't allow omni properties, anything science can't answer, neither can theology. Therefore, we should all adopt some kind of fideism in regards to these absolute properties attributed to a God.
Okay, so Tom,
Oh,
I'm really
is he
sorry.
done?
Yeah, I think he's done. But I was having some technical difficulties with the audio, so you kind of jumped in and out a little bit, Tom, for the audience. Can you summarize what you just said quickly, or I mean, you can do the whole thing again if you want, but you for the most part you were there, but there were a couple times where you cut in and out. So for the audience's sake, what would you like?
Well, just to summarize it, I can do the four premises and the conclusion. All forms of human knowledge only allow for tentative additions of like counting upwards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can't justify a biggest number. Like there's no way to do that in all human knowledge. Absolute omni properties are like arguing for a biggest number, and no amount of human knowledge can indicate those. God has omni properties, therefore no amount of human knowledge can justify belief in a God.
All right, so let's turn it back over to you, Trent.
And just if people want a clearer understanding, I gave essentially the same talk to Dr. Jeff Zwierink, the astrophysicist, in one of my conversations. You can just go watch the introduction there. It's the same thing pretty much.
All right.
Well, how about that? Yeah, I've got a few questions about that, but I'll tell you what. I think it is important to begin at the beginning, and where you start determines where you end up. So I'd be happy to give some of my foundations and fundamental principles, methodological and substantive, along with some examples of things that I think I do know. And I would invite Mr. Jump to follow suit in that, and after my little spiel, tell me some things that he thinks he knows as well as he knows anything else. Because if we have examples of things that we think we know, then we can tell how much common ground we have. And if we don't, well, then that could be a problem. But I will have some some questions about some of the terminology that was used there. So for me, my fundamental starting point is evidentialism. I've always been an evidentialist by nature. I went to the University of Rochester to study evidentialism more intently with two founding figures there. While in grad school, I really sifted through arguments for and against evidentialism that made their way into this book, Evidentialism and Its Discontents. You might have heard of readers, listeners, watchers might have heard of W.K. Clifford's statement of evidentialism. It's wrong always and everywhere for any reason to believe anything not on sufficient evidence. Thumbs up, I like it. But I also think, Cameron, that you used the word knowledge, and Tom uses a lot of words, but proof and certainty and all these. I don't think any of these binary notions are very helpful, honestly. So I don't really like to talk much about belief or knowledge or proof or any other binary property. What I'm interested in is the degree of certainty that I have a right to in any given proposition. So the kind of evidentialism that I hold to is proportionalism or probabilism. And so when you take evidentialism and run it through a probabilistic filter, you basically get the Enlightenment view. And so Hume put it a little more eloquently than Locke did, but they both said the same thing. Hume says, the wise person proportions their belief to the strength of the evidence. And that is my fundamental methodological commitment, to attempt to proportion my belief to the strength of the evidence, to encourage others to do so. I think that is a benchmark of intellectual integrity, and it's my fundamental methodological starting point. Now, substantively, I'm basically what you might call a common sense realist. I think that most of what science says is pretty accurate and probably true. Science can never get it perfect, but I think science gets most things mostly right, and that progress in science is not, as the paradigm shift folks would think, just switching from one thing to another. I think it's pretty much steady progress, though, with saltations now and then. And so I think math and science are hallmarks of intellectual activity, and that we ought to look to them as examples and emulate them. And so Tom said a lot of stuff, but I'm not sure I got an answer to the question, what is the proper epistemology of religion? My answer is very, very simple. The proper epistemology of religion is exactly that of science, without exception. Not similar, but exactly the same. Because I think the epistemology of everything is exactly the same, and it's approximately described by Bayesian confirmation theory. And that the axioms of standard probability theory, as axiomatized by Kolmogorov or other people, are regulative ideals for degrees of belief. And so rather than try to untangle the stuff from Tom's opening monologue, I would like to actually hear him tell me what are some things that he thinks he knows. Oh, I didn't give my example. So, for example, I'll say I know. I think I know that humans and chimps share a common ancestor. I think I know there are other planets. I think I know that there are atoms and subatomic particles. More importantly, I think it's very probably true that those things exist and behave approximately the way that contemporary physics says they do. I think chemistry is approximately correct in what it says about water boiling and things like that. I think biology is fundamentally correct in what it says about the history of evolution. And I think physics is largely correct about what it says about the atomic world and the subatomic world. And so those are examples of things I think I know. And I'm wondering if Tom thinks he knows those things.
All right, I would take the position of confusing the map and the territory. I'd say that those are descriptions of our phenomenological experience of reality, but we can't justify the claim those are, in fact, reality itself, like a distinction between Kant's phenomenal and noumenal. Like, I would grant that I probably believe that they are reality, but I can't demonstrate or justify that kind of a claim. Things I would say I know, you asked, like, what would I claim that I know? I know that I think, therefore I am, and I would grant things like logical truths, A equals A, law of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, mathematical truths, those kinds of things.
So if somebody asks me, hey, if they say, hey, do you know whether or not humans and chimps share a common ancestor? I say, yeah, I do. I do know that. What do you say? Do you know?
I would agree with that, but I'd use a different definition of no. So I would ask, do you know we're not in the matrix? And to which pretty much every scientist would say, no, we can't know that. But science doesn't care. Science doesn't ask those kinds of capital T truth claims. Science only cares about the phenomenological.
So I think that's wrong, and I think it's not just wrong; it's clearly and almost scandalously wrong. It might be true of some physicists, but to say that it's true that generally, I think, is demonstrably false. Certainly false of the physicists that I have had physics and philosophy lunches with for, 17 years. It's certainly false of the folks at Rochester at the Laser Institute there, where they do high energy physics. It's certainly false of the particle physicists at St. Louis University have been influenced by Jaynes. It's certainly false of there's a guy at UT that I know fairly well in condensed matter physics there. It's false for Gerald Cleaver. So I don't think that's largely true. But you're using a lot of terminology that you say things like truth with a capital T and stopping point for truth. And Tom, I got to say, I think you're flying a little high there, man. I think you need to keep it a little closer to the ground. So I'm thinking somewhere in here I've got the School of Athens and Plato's looking up to the heavens. Well, I'm an Aristotelian, man. I'm pointing straight down to the ground. And as an Aristotelian, I think, look, so Aristotle defined truth very simply in a series of monosyllabic terms so everybody could understand them. This is approximately a correct translation. He who says of that which is that it is, or of that which is not that it is not, speaks truth. He who says of that which is that it is not, or of that which is not that it is, does not speak the truth. Or as Mortimer Adler put it, it's just getting your is and your is not lined up. Okay, so truth isn't complicated. It's a very simple concept. It's basically when the subject term of your sentence, the thing that your subject term refers to, has the property that your predicate term refers to. It's just getting it right. So when you talk about stopping point for truth, I literally don't know what you mean. And I'm not trying to be coy. I'm not trying to be cute. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. It's just stopping point for truth is not a term that I would ever use or think about using, nor is the phrase truth with a capital T. So I just don't know what you're talking about. And it bums me out because it seems like these notions are pretty fundamental to your view, and yet I don't have a clue what you're saying.
Are you familiar with Kant's phenomenal numinal distinction?
I am, but why don't you explain it to me?
All right, so the numinal is the way reality really is, and the phenomenal is our appearance of reality, or the model of reality constructed as far as we can tell. Is that a fair definition?
I mean, I don't need some German logician, some wordy German logician to explain to me the difference between reality and appearance. I understand that there's such a thing as misleading evidence. Sometimes things aren't as they appear. Sometimes our senses are misleading. Okay, so what? I mean, guess what, Tom? I know I'm not in a matrix. I know that I share a common ancestor with chimpanzees, and I don't need some special cosmic, thing to tell me that. I read Darwinists and I read basic biology. I don't know why we got to bring Kant into it. Yeah, sometimes things aren't what they appear to be, but most of the time they are. Why think otherwise? Why don't you think you're not in the matrix? I think that's crazy.
So you said you didn't understand what I meant when I said a stopping point for truth. Well, what I meant was the numinal phenomenal distinction. That's what I'm talking about. So the reason I brought that up was in order to explain to you what I'm talking about.
All right. Well, the concept of a stopping point for truth plays absolutely zero role in my theorizing about the epistemology of anything.
Okay.
Just zero. I mean, all I care about is about the only word you used that I was able to track was tentative. Now that I understand, because I'm a probabilist. In fact, I'm a radical probabilist. I take a lot of heat Whoa, did you hear that thunder? Holy cow. I take a lot of heat from certain schools of epistemology because I don't believe that I can be certain of anything. Not even I think, therefore I am. Not technically certain. Okay, so I'm what's called a radical probabilist, a term that was coined by Richard Jeffries, who's kind of my philosophical hero. And so everything that I believe tentatively, but that doesn't mean I don't believe it's actually that way. I mean, technically, my belief in evolution is tentative, but that doesn't mean I don't believe it, and it certainly doesn't mean I don't know it. It just means that fallibilism is true, that knowledge doesn't entail certainty. That's actually a big part of what my dissertation was on, was the proposition that knowledge does not entail certainty. Do you think knowledge entails certainty?
Only of certain kinds of claims. So I take the science.
I didn't ask you that. I asked you if knowledge entailed certainty, Tom.
Only of certain kinds of claims. So knowledge can have different classes. I can say I have knowledge that I am imagining a unicorn. Does that require certainty? No. Do I have knowledge that we are evolved from apes and we have a common ancestor? Does that require absolute certainty? No. I can say that's empirical knowledge. I'd classify it as a certain kind of knowledge. But if I said I have knowledge that there is an all-powerful being who is by definition not created, I'd say, yep, that requires absolute knowledge. And if you don't have it, it's unjustified.
Why?
Because
first of all, you said absolute knowledge. I asked you about certainty. You see, I'm
using those as synonyms.
I'm really good at telling when the words change.
I'm using those as synonyms, so you can take them as the same thing. So like you mentioned earlier, you said
in your terminology, absolute knowledge means what?
Like absolute certainty. So absolute knowledge, absolute certainty. So going back to what you said earlier.
Okay, simple question. Why think that? Why all of a sudden, when it gets to a claim you don't like, does certainty required for knowledge? And guess what? I already said I don't care about knowledge. Okay, fine. You don't want me to know that God exists because I can't be absolutely certain? Okay, fine. I don't care. I don't need knowledge for anything. There's this book about this guy who's obsessed with knowledge and its limits.
Uh-oh. It looks like his video cut out.
Yeah.
Maybe it's his webcam got disconnected. Oh, Trent. He got a little bit too ambitious. All right. Well, let me just tell you guys that eventually, probably when there's about half an hour left, we're going to do live Q&A. We're going to see if we can make that happen. I know that... wait a second. Now he's calling me here. Hang on a second. There we go. Now you're back.
I'm back. It's the first time I've done one of these things, and the screen on my tablet is like precipitously where it needs to be, exactly where it needs to be. And so if it's tugged on even a little bit, it tips over. I was a little worried it was going to do that.
All right. So what book do you have to show us?
Knowledge and Its Limits. So there's a group of people that are obsessed with the concept of knowledge. And I took a lot of flack from these people because I just don't care about the concept of knowledge. I don't think it's that interesting. I don't think it explains much of anything. I think that ideal science can completely do without the idea of knowledge or any other binary concept like proof or demonstration or certainty. As I said at the beginning, I'm interested in properties that are graded, degree of belief, and the reason is because evidence comes in degrees. And because evidence comes in degrees, and all I need to know is the degree of evidence to determine the degree of belief I ought to have, I don't need the concept knowledge. I honestly think the concept of knowledge is inert. I don't think it is explanatorily interesting or relevant. So if you want to say that knowledge entails certainty in some categories willy-nilly, well then fine. I don't care whether I know something or not. What I care about is what my strength of evidence is, and therefore what my strength of belief ought to be. And I'm happy to say that I'm happy to defend, that my belief in God ought to be quite strong because my evidence is quite strong, especially the cumulative case of over 24 arguments for God's existence. But that's not what we're here to debate. We're not here to debate that first order question. We're debating a methodological question. And the methodological question is, what is the proper epistemology of religion? I have given a simple answer. It's Bayesian confirmation theory. And my reasoning for that was that it fits with probabilistic or degree theoretic evidentialism. And I think it is the method of science that when you look at excellent cases of scientific inference, what you read off of that is the rational reconstruction of those inferences is essentially what's characterized by Bayesian confirmation theory. So that's my answer. I mean, and I don't need anything about absolute properties, absolute knowledge. I don't need truth with a capital T. I don't need stopping points for truth. I don't need biggest numbers. I don't need any of these things. All I need is a basic notion of evidence and probability theory.
Tom, you there? Hold up. He might not even be in the call right now. Hang on, let me get him here. Oh my goodness. Sorry guys, first time stream.
Yeah, this is the first time on using Skype, right?
Yeah, first time using Skype. Let me get him in here. That he makes that face so often, like I literally thought he was just sitting there making that face. All right, hang on a second. Let me see if I can get him in here.
While you're doing that, I would like to recommend this book to all your viewers. Why Should Anyone Believe Anything at All by James Sire. I think it's a really fantastic book written at a very readable level. I think that it sets forth a very common sense epistemological framework that really respects science and then goes on to apply that and illustrate it for certain cases of religious belief. But I think for somebody who's just really wanting to first get into epistemology of religion, I think this is a wonderful place to start. So I highly recommend that book. And then there's a really neat book, Habits of the Mind, that James Sire also wrote that really goes into some detail on intellectual virtues. And so I think that there's just no need for skepticism, whether it's about science or religion. I mean, I may be mistaken, I might be wrong in my beliefs, but I don't think that there's anything that forecloses that from the beginning, anything methodological or necessary. It's just that if I'm mistaken and wrong, I'm mistaken for the same old boring reasons I'm mistaken or wrong about anything else, which is either I had misleading evidence or I did a bad job of responding to the evidence I had.
You can keep talking if you want. I'm still trying to get him back. His name is not popping up for me. It's a disaster.
And it might even, some people sometimes when I present this view across the country, around the world, some people say, well, okay, well, this is all well and good for you, but you're changing the rules. I mean, this is very different than the Christianity that I'm familiar with, where the epistemology of religion is you just believe. Where Mark Twain or whoever it was who said that faith is believing what you know ain't so. And that's just false. The things that I'm saying, I think, fit in excellently with the traditional religious epistemology stemming all the way back to Scripture, certainly through St. Thomas Aquinas. And this book by Richard Swinburne, Faith and Reason, I think demonstrates that the approach that I'm taking actually isn't unusual at all in the history of philosophy. It is a development. I think the generalization of rational belief from the binary concept of knowledge to a series of degrees of belief is something of a breakthrough and innovation. But as James Franklin said in his absolutely masterful book, The Science of Conjecture, he gives dozens of cases from St. Thomas Aquinas and others from the medieval period and even farther back, where probabilistic thinking is actually present there. It's not fully developed like it is after Pascal and Fermat, but it's definitely implicitly there. And when I did the Butler lecture at Oxford, that was my whole point, was to show that even in Aquinas we had the concept of various degrees of belief. Now, of course, Aquinas would want to say that knowledge was very special, unlike myself, but he definitely had a concept of degrees of belief, and he definitely had the concept of strength of belief, responding to the evidence, and he just believes that the best evidence we could have of anything is testimonial evidence from God. And I mean, I don't see how you could think otherwise. I mean, you may think there's not a God, but if you do think there's a God, then you think if God says something, then you can trust that thing completely. But I do think that some kind of evidentialist, probabilistic degrees of belief picture is at least inherent in the tradition. And after Pascal gets worked out somewhat well in the Enlightenment, but then doesn't really take off in a big way until the late 19th century, when people started working out what they called an algebra of belief. Guys like Venn, some listeners have probably heard of Venn diagrams, and Boole. These guys actually had manuals on how to apply probability to belief in their logic books. And then in the 1920s, there were breakthroughs in probability theory, and there have been big breakthroughs every couple of decades since then, so that today we have a very rich and thriving industry of people studying the mathematical structure of scientific inference. And so I think that because science is a paradigm of rational understanding, of rational endeavor, of rational belief formation, we ought to look to that as an example. And when we do, I think what we get is Bayesian confirmation theory. And I think that applies to literally every endeavor. Tom, you're back.
Hey, right. Can you guys hear me?
I literally knocked my computer over. my screen, I told you I was on my Windows Surface tablet, and to get the view where Cameron wanted it to, I had to like prop that screen up to where it's like that. So even a fly landing on it will knock it over. So I will try to stay in my seat and be still and more calm and not knock anything over the whole rest of the time.
All right, so to pick up where we left off, you asked what reason is there to justify the claim that you need absolute knowledge for claims of what I call stopping points for truth, right?
Yeah.
All right, so it's what you said earlier, your quote about you must proportion your belief to the evidence. I don't remember exactly what you said, but I believe it was the Laplace one.
It's the gist.
Right, so if you're making a claim of like something being all powerful or uncreated, you need absolute knowledge. Like if I claimed there was a being who knows absolutely everything, then I would need to know absolutely everything to know there's not something he doesn't know.
Well, I think that is a fallacy. I think that's a non sequitur. I see zero reason to believe that the content, just because the content of the belief has an infinity in it, that doesn't mean the evidence needs to. If somebody tells me that there's a aleph naught number of fundamental particles, I'm going to say, oh, that's an interesting claim. Why do you think that? And then they'll give an argument, and we'll go back and forth. But I'm not going to say to somebody, oh, you postulate, countably many particles. Well, you're going to need infinite evidence for that. It's just an absolute non sequitur to go from an infinity in the content to an infinity in the evidence. It's just an absolute non sequitur.
Right, I agree, and that's not what I'm saying. So I'm saying what requires the infinite evidence to say there is an alpha null number of particles, but there is not an alpha null plus one number of particles. That's the claim that requires the infinite evidence, because then you have to take all of the alpha null and then know everything outside of the alpha null and so there's nothing there. You're claiming to have absolute knowledge there and say there is not an alpha null plus one anywhere. That requires absolute certainty. That's an absolute claim.
Why? Why does that require absolute certainty? I mean, because it almost sounds like you're saying that the reason why, because sometimes people will say you have to have omniscience to make a negative existential claim, which you really don't. But but I really want to hear you explain this, because it makes absolute zero sense to me that this kind of claim would require some kind of absolute evidence. It's a non sequitur. There's no like law proportioning. There's a law proportioning strength of belief to strength of evidence, but not strength of evidence to like scope of claim. I mean, anytime anybody makes a negative existential claim, they're sort of, in a sense, claiming to know all of reality. If I say there's no crows that are purple with pink spots, well, guess what? I mean, technically, I've made a claim about everything that exists, but I don't need some kind of special evidence for that. In fact, I don't need anything special evidence-wise for that. In fact, I dare say, Tom, I claim right now, live in front of everybody, there are no purple crows with pink polka dots.
And do you have absolute knowledge of that?
I don't know what absolute knowledge is.
Then I would say no, you cannot say you have. Right, yeah.
No, I don't know. I'm not. I just told you I'm a fallible.
Right, so then that would not fit the definition of no I'm using. You have a lowercase k no. You don't have the capital K no.
I don't care about the case.
Right.
At all. And I didn't claim to have it. The question, Cameron's question to us wasn't like, what does it take to capital K no? It was, what is the proper epistemology of religion?
Right, and from my perspective, in order to justify claims, since religion entails a God and God has omni properties, you need to be able to justify those. Not all religions entail a God. Atheism or Buddhism is atheistic. Correct. I'm specifically, when referring to religion, I'm jumping to the conclusion of the Abrahamic theistic religions, because that's usually the content of the show.
Have finite God versions of them.
Sure. I mean, the Pastafarianism is technically a religion, and Satanism is technically a religion, at least by politics.
You don't need an infinite God to raise Jesus Christ from the dead.
Correct. You don't need an infinite God to have a designer to the universe. So that's not
great.
The claims
So
I'm saying.
Let's leave that out of it. Let's say I'm a finite Godist.
That would be great. I am totally okay with that. That would just completely accept everything about my introduction, because all I said was that we have to be a fideist about those omni properties. That was the conclusion of my intro.
But that's not the summation of religion. I think that's highly misleading to say that's your main point, because the question was, what's the proper epistemology of religion? Because I mean, look, I think Jesus rose from the dead. I think I can defend that to a very high degree of probability, such that anybody who doesn't believe it, well, something went wrong somewhere. You okay with that?
That would be the second half of my epistemology. My introduction only presented the first half.
Okay. Holy cow, that was just the first half. All right. Give me the second half then.
So the second half is that there's some difference between our imagination and our experience, and you have to show there's whatever you're explaining isn't of the imagination, is of the experiential kind of thing, the internal-external kind of distinction. So I would reject that your claim that you can show with any probability that Jesus rose from the dead. I would say there is no evidence of that at all.
Why?
Because testimony doesn't qualify as evidence of anything that lacks an empirical basis. So I mean, miracles, magic, mythical creatures, the paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, no amount of historical testimony will justify any of those things.
So you know that movie Princess Bride?
Yes, the one with.
Do you remember?
You keep using that word, but I do not think you know what that word means.
That's right. I'm like Inigo Montoya talking to Vizzini. You keep using this word. I don't think it means what you think it means. I mean, you talk about empirical. What do you mean by that?
Right, I'm talking about my distinctions and stuff that I've written into my epistemology. So I'm using.
Yeah, okay. Well, tell me about it. What do you mean by the word empirical?
Verifiable through sense experience.
Which senses?
What? Which? The sense experience of the five senses that we have? Are there others?
I think so. So tell me this. You mentioned that you believe, do you believe the transitive property? You gave some mathematical example, but I forget what it was.
Right. A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C.
Yeah, you believe that?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's true by definition.
True by definition? Why do you believe it's true by definition?
Because logic is a formal language, so it's literally...
Why? Well, it doesn't follow from logic being a formal language that that's true by definition. That's a non sequitur.
It's true by definition because logic is a formal language, and we've defined it in such a way that it means that. That's how it is a description of how we think.
That sounds circular. It sounds like you're defining modus ponens thusly. if modus ponens is part of formal logic, then it's reliable. Modus ponens is a form of formal logic, therefore it is reliable. That's absolutely circular.
All claims of knowledge are either circular, infinite regress, or dogmatism of Grippus Relimus, so that's not a problem. As long as epistemic circularity, what's his name? Alston.
Bergman.
William Alston, I think.
Yeah. So say that again. All knowledge is what?
Either circular reasoning, infinite regress, or dogmatism, brute fact. Or dogmatism would entail brute fact and metaphysical necessity.
So which of those is the proposition that humans and chimps share a common ancestor? Is that circular, regress, or dogmatic?
I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it.
Well, we got time.
I'd have to take a great deal of time to really process through the information and go through the foundations of science and which one it is.
Well, forgive me for saying this, but I think that's a problem with your epistemology that you can't label that. I mean, we're talking about evolution, man.
Right.
I mean, just to be sure, just to be absolutely sure to get this off the table. Are you a creationist?
No.
Okay. So, so if somebody asks me, like, what kind of knowledge is your knowledge that humans and chimps share a common ancestor? I just say the regular old kind, the kind that's supported by the evidence that I have. What's wrong with that?
As far as I know, there isn't like a regular kind of knowledge definition anywhere in philosophy of knowledge. So there's no like the regular kind. I can't find that in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
There's tons of people. That is the main line of epistemology, where people take the word knowledge out of ordinary language. If you go, if you look at Russell, going back to Russell's stuff on knowledge, Ayer's stuff on knowledge, certainly Chisholm, who was my philosophical grandfather, there's a view called particularism, and they start by saying, okay, give me standard examples of things we know. And then we'll take those standard examples and like Socrates in the dialogues, we'll see what they have in common. But the examples they take are examples from everyday life, Tom. They're just ordinary, plain old examples.
Right, and Roger Chisholm used this distinction of particularism versus Methodism to outline the problem of the criterion, showing that particularism is arbitrary. You can just pick anything and call that the thing.
That is definitely not what Chisholm said.
Well, I'm pretty sure he was a Methodist, and that was his conclusion. Why he chose
that is definitely false.
I would like to challenge him on that sometime.
He was not, and he did not. Dean Zimmerman and Rich Feldman, I think it was, or Fred Feldman, did an article on Chisholm's views, I think, in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Dean Zimmerman was Rod's last student, and then my dissertation director, Richard Feldman, was a direct student of Chisholm. And also Richard Filmerton was a student of Chisholm. So I think back to the drawing board on Chisholm there. But certainly the main line of epistemology, I mean, I've got probably 6 feet of epistemology textbooks. And the chapters on knowledge are pretty commonly they say, okay, well, what is knowledge? Okay, what are some examples of knowledge? And they just take examples from science, everyday life, different, areas. There's nothing like magical about it. It's just knowledge. We use that term all the time. So
I just pulled up the website. What is epistemic status of the particular's answer to Chisholm seems to take what is the status is weak, being nothing more than an assumption. So it seems like he doesn't really take a high stance of particularism, at least by the article.
It's really, his view is probably better classified as a form of reflected equilibrium, because he will say that we have to revise our concepts in light of theorizing. But all you got to do is take his slender little volume called Theory of Knowledge, and he starts out with what are self-presenting properties, and from there he goes up to 13 degrees of positive epistemic status, or maybe it's 6 above and 6 below. But he designates multiple degrees of positive epistemic status based on the strength of the evidence that you get. And his big mentor was C.I. Lewis, who was actually an idealist. But Rod was a direct realist, and he believed that our experiences gave us knowledge about the external world. And neither he nor my mentors nor myself have found any good reason to be a skeptic. I know I'm not in a matrix. Do you know you're not in a matrix?
Well, again, I break knowledge into two different categories. There's different kinds of knowledge. I define them differently. So I define...
But Tom, in English, I agreed to conduct this discussion in English. Okay, so I mean, we can all make up our own words, but I'm talking about the English word knowledge. In the ordinary sense, do you know you're not in the matrix?
The ordinary sense. I don't use that language. So you're making up your own language. I like to identify.
There is. I mean,
again, I listed the numeral phenomenal distinction. This is not a hard thing to grasp. There is a difference between these two that is philosophically accepted in the literature.
But that
whether you accept it or not is irrelevant. This is the
difference between appearance and reality has nothing whatsoever by itself to say on behalf of skepticism, because all it says is the distinction only means this: at any given time, it's possible, in some sense of possible, that the appearance isn't correctly indicating a reality. But so what? So what if there's some possibility that appearance isn't correctly revealing reality? Why care? Why some possibility? There's no need for some possibility to stop me from knowing.
Because there are certain kinds of claims that entail that level of burden of proof.
It's pretty interesting. They all turn out to be claims you don't like.
Yeah, like claims that there is an all-powerful, uncreated being. Yes.
I didn't make that claim. I don't need that claim.
I'm happy with that. That would be good. That'd be great. If we all adopted that, I'd be really happy. If all theists just got rid of that claim, I'd be happy.
I'm happy to accept that on the testimony of Jesus and the prophets of the Old Testament and the New Testament and the writers of the New Testament. And I don't need an infinite God to raise Jesus from the dead.
Okay, yeah, so going back to that part of the distinction. So I would say that testimony fails for the same reason testimony of homeopathy fails. We know testimony isn't evidence of things actually the way they are in the world, either in the apparent sense or in the capital case sense. So the testimony doesn't justify anything, or as Michael Licona put it, most biblical scholars and historians hold to it that the study of miracles lies outside of the bounds of historian acting within their professional capacity, because testimony can't justify miracles.
Why think that?
For the same reason, testimony doesn't justify homeopathy or UFOs or aliens or unicorns or mythical creatures, magic, the paranormal, the supernatural, or any of the other things that don't have an empirical basis. Testimony doesn't justify those things.
Do you think that testimony can justify a claim that a person was in a certain place at a certain time?
Sure, we have empirical basis of people. Not a problem.
Great. Well, that's what the apostles testified to. They just testified to seeing certain empirical facts, to seeing Jesus nailed to a cross, to seeing him pierced, to seeing him buried, and then seeing him again some days later. Those are all empirical claims, Tom.
Yes, they are, and none of those entail any kind of supernatural anything. Those can all be explained by, there's none of those are even evidence of any supernatural anything, or a god of some kind, if you don't like the word supernatural. So all of that can be explained naturally, and we have an empirical basis for all of that.
So you say, but what you're not saying now all of a sudden is that you can't know it. And that's an important shift, because you're trying to get out of even debating the God thing by saying that you can't have any knowledge of that, any evidence of it. But now in the resurrection case, you're kind of stuck down in the first order world of weighing the evidence. That's got to be a little uncomfortable for a guy like you.
No, because as I said in the beginning, that's the second half of my epistemology. The first half of my epistemology deals with all the omni-properties, and once we get rid of the omni-properties, then we go to the second half, which does deal with the real world and distinction between, is this imaginary or is this something about the world?
Right, and where we left off was that whereas in the case of some infinite, this literally idiosyncratic view that claims about infinities require some sort of special evidence, that gets you off the hook from even really having to debate about it. But when the claims, as in the case of the resurrection, are just claims about seeing things, seeing a guy here, seeing this happen, seeing him there, and then seeing him there later, those are just standard empirical claims. So
Right. There's no
I
infinite in
understand
that.
that you believe that you've got a better explanation, but your like evidence standard shifting thing doesn't apply to those claims. And that's got to be a little uncomfortable for a guy like you.
No, because my first half of my epistemology only applies to infinite. So if there's no infinites there, then that wouldn't apply. And my other half of my epistemology would apply. I don't see where the problem here is.
Well, but it gets you down in the gutter of actually having to argue evidence against evidence.
Which is
And
totally
look,
fine. That's the second half of my epistemology. That's what it does. There's no problem with that. I don't see.
well, but here's the thing, that if you do get some evidence that Jesus rose from the dead, because remember, before you said you couldn't have any because of the nature of those claims. Here, these are ordinary claims. And so if you get some evidence that Jesus rose from the dead and that Jesus was God, and Jesus is making claims about divinity, then you've got some testimonial evidence about divinity. Because Jesus will claim to have experienced God directly.
Okay, you lost me there for a second. So let's go back. We have testimony. Testimony is only reasonable to justify other kinds of testimony. If you want to say that something exists, like miracles, magic, mythical creatures, the paranormal, the supernatural, or UFOs, you need empirical evidence. Testimony, not good enough. You got to give me future predictions.
I asked you if testimony could justify claims about people being in certain locations at certain times. And you said
yes. I
yes.
apologize. Let me clarify that. So testimony in conjunction with empirical basis. It has an implicit empirical basis. If I said I saw a dog, that's reasonable to believe because we have lots of empirical things about dogs that I haven't mentioned in this statement, like their taxonomy, their phylogeny, their chemical composition, training them, what they're allergic to. There's lots of implicit empirical evidence in that word dog. So it's reasonable to believe I saw a dog based off my testimony with addition to the empirical evidence of the implicit empirical evidence of all the things about dogs. If I told you I saw a unicorn, that would not be reasonable to believe because there is no implicit empirical basis for unicorns. So the testimony is reasonable to believe if with conjunction of an empirical evidence. It is not reasonable to believe for things that don't have an implicit empirical basis. That would be
what is an empirical basis?
Something we can verify, testable predictions, physically interact with, sense perception that we can verify. Science.
Do you believe that atoms exist?
Yes.
Do you believe that quarks exist?
I'm not sure if they've been verified, but I'm going to go with yes. It's what gluons are the ones that haven't been verified. So quarks, yes. Quarks are the ones that make up protons and neutrons.
What's your evidence that quarks exist?
Indirect observation through testable experiment.
You've done this?
No, I'm just going off of the scientists.
Oh, so a testimony is your evidence that there are quarks.
Right, purely because I don't have the ability to, but it is in principle possible for me to do so.
In principle possible for you to do what?
To do the experiments. I could build a particle collider if I had enough money, and I could do the experiments and verify the results.
And but what does it take to verify those results? They don't see quarks.
Indirect observation.
Indirect observation. Tell me more about this.
So we make a future prediction. We say if this thing exists, we're going to see these kinds of results in the future, and if we get the results, it's evidence of the thing we predicted.
Well, that's what the early apostles did with the resurrection of Jesus. They verified that Jesus was divine by predicting certain of his behaviors. The fact that he was the Son of God predicts that he would rise again. That he was not definitely predicts that he doesn't.
Yeah, and I can predict last week's lottery numbers too, but that's not evidence I got magic powers. That's evidence I can post-dict something. So if you want to say that that's evidence that Jesus actually rose from the dead, I have to, in principle, be possible to show someone raising from the dead. I have to be able to build a raise from the dead collider and show someone can raise from the dead. If I can't, in principle, do that, it's not verified.
Now it sounds to me, so I just got the galley proofs for an essay on history of philosophy, religion in the 20th century for a book that's coming out on the history of philosophy in the 20th century. And now it just sounds like you've taken a time machine back to the 1920s and it's just plain old logical positivism.
No. Nothing I said there is logical positivism.
Do you think that the idea that you have to be in principle able to do some sort of experiment seems on really shaky ground?
Right. There's certain things that you can know without that entirely, like logical truths, a priori knowledge, synthetic knowledge. You don't need to, or analytic knowledge. You don't need
even empirical knowledge. Are you familiar with the actual method of coming to know there are quarks. A friend of mine wrote a book called something like The Existence of the Top Quark. It's kind of and it tells the story of the discovery of the top quark. Do you know how these experiments go?
No, but I believe it has something to do with weighing the energy in the particles and adding them up to see if they add up to a certain amount when you use particle collisions. And then watching the properties like the spin and the charge and different kinds of things and how they interact in those kinds of particle interactions. And then doing the calculations and making predictions based off of the mathematical analysis.
Predictions of what?
Predictions of the kind of energy that you're going to get in those kinds of particle collisions.
And how do they measure that? How do they come to know that those energy levels have occurred?
With the particle collider and the energy things breaking off and hitting the sensors on the outside of the Large Hadron Collider.
Okay, so what they know are that certain needles move to certain numbers on certain instruments.
Right.
But they never see the objects themselves.
That's how indirect observation works. But indirect observation is a form of empirical observation. Like, I don't know. I don't see.
That's great. And I think that we have indirect observation of God through his effects in the world. And certainly sounds like you can't rule that out in principle.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That there is a God makes the proposition or hypothesis that there's a God makes certain predictions. And on my view, more of those predictions are more likely verified than falsified, and some of the observational data are contraindicated by the proposition that there is no supernatural whatsoever.
Right.
So when we do natural theology, we're just doing what you call indirect evidence, just like we do in subatomic particles.
Right. So I'm not saying there is no God or there is no supernatural. Like in my introduction, I said that would be unreasonable. It would be unreasonable for me to say there is no supernatural or there is no God.
No, I'm not. I heard that part. I mean, I heard a lot. But I'm picking on the part about the need for special evidence. And because remember, my position was the proper epistemology of religion is just the proper epistemology of science.
I agree with that completely.
Which is just proper great epistemology. And you seem to want to do some special pleading to make it virtually impossible, almost by definition, to get evidence of God or things like the resurrection. And look, God's just an unobservable entity. So big deal.
That's great. Like if I could pray to a God and have him materialize a gold brick every time, I would count that as evidence of a God. So if you can actually make predictions with the supernatural beings and have it happen, that's good evidence. I will accept that.
And a lot of us think that there are plenty of those things that have occurred. Now, what you're doing is, if we want to have a debate about the existence of God, I'm cool with that. If you want to have a debate about whether Jesus rose from the dead, I'm cool with that. But the longer we go on talking and the more we focus on science, the less your whole noumenal phenomenal stuff seems to matter, and the less your whole skepticism stuff seems to matter. It seems to have kind of dropped out of the picture.
Correct, because that only has to do with infinites. And if there's no infinites involved, then that part of my epistemology has nothing to do with the question. I mean, that's not a rebuttal to my position. That is exactly what my position is. That part of my epistemology does not have to do with the scientific aspect, which is only about the tentative stuff in our realm. So
let's talk about this infinite stuff. So I want to get a little more clear about this claim. So it sounds to me, and I really do want to be corrected if I'm mistaken, because I have no interest in straw man arguments at all. I just really want to, I'm always just very curious when I hear positions that I don't understand. And I would much rather understand a position and know why I believe it or don't believe it than not understand it. I'm just built that way. I think a lot of people in philosophy are that way. I think a lot of people get into philosophy because they're built that way.
Me too.
So the claim seems to be this. Any proposition that entails that any quantity is without limit, can't have any evidence for it at all? I mean, take the proposition that look, there's got to be cosmologies according to which there are countably many universes or particles or something. I mean, that's a totally legitimate thing to claim in science. So is your claim that, like, if somebody says, "Oh, there's Aleph naught multiverses or Aleph naught particles or something like that," what do you say? Do you think they can come to know that or get evidence for and against it?
No, it's like what you said before. Remember, my analogy was that if you claim there is Aleph number of particles, but there's not an Aleph null plus 1 number of particles, that's the problem.
Well, why would that matter?
I mean,
Aleph. First of all, Aleph naught plus 1 is Aleph naught. So technically,
no, it's not. In set theory, that's incorrect.
That is not incorrect.
No, it's not. In set theory, you can add, multiply, and subtract infinites all you want. There's no problem there.
Right, but you have to do so using things like power sets. But Aleph naught plus 1 is Aleph naught. That's just very simple. You can absolutely have orders of infinity. And depending on whether the continuum hypothesis is true, then the power set of the set of natural numbers, might be the cardinality of the continuum. That's fine.
No, I completely reject that, because I've seen in many cases and talked with many mathematicians where you can actually take infinites, add 1, subtract the infinite, you still have 1. So you have some infinite like Aleph null plus 1, subtract Aleph null, you have 1 left over. And they're like using Hilbert's Hotel, you can have different sets and have a certain finite number outside of those sets. There's no problem with there. That's completely set in set theory. We have those answers. We can do that.
Nope, but it doesn't matter. I mean, like, why would the one number make a difference to the entire epistemology of the claim?
Well, the problem is that you're saying this is it and there is nothing beyond this.
Well, why is that any more weird than saying there's 10 to the 80th particles and not 10 to the 80th plus 1?
Right, that would essentially be the same thing. So if you're saying then
infinity has nothing to do with it then. It has to do with specificity.
Right. Yes, it's what you said earlier. It's like a universal negative or a universal negation or something. So
look,
infinites were your word there, but I just kind of adopted it. So the problem was you phrased it really well earlier. I forget the way you phrased it.
Well, thank you.
It was something like knowledge claims to justify a universal negation or something like that.
Well, I mean, there are people who say that negative existential claims have in their scope literally everything that exists, which is in a certain respect true.
Right.
But look, I can say there's no Santa Claus, and I don't need like some sort of special infinite quantum evidence of that, man. I just know there's not a Santa Claus. There's nothing special about it.
Right, and then going along with that, the universal existential negative kind of thing says, actually you do. Actually, you do need to show there isn't a Santa Claus hiding down somewhere in Alpha Centauri that you just don't know yet.
I don't need to show that at all. Have you heard of prior probabilities? They're awesome.
Yes, I have, and I've heard of the problem of the priors too.
Okay. So, but without priors, you can't really do much of anything. And so you don't have to.
I disagree with that.
You don't always have to like show that Santa's not hiding on the dark side of the moon. You can assess the antecedent probability of that, and it doesn't even rise to the level of needing to be, ruled out, man.
Well, that's for the part earlier you said you can't be absolutely certain about anything, even I think, therefore I am. I definitely disagree with you on that aspect. Like, I would say, yes, we can, especially with I think, therefore I am. Like, I mean, would you say that there is some probability that you can square root a pork chop? Is there a probability there?
There's a probability greater than 0 that my concept of squaring or pork chop is like some evil demon has, deceived me on what those terms mean. But so what? I don't need certainty for anything ever.
Okay, so how could an evil demon stop you from the I think, therefore I am thing? How can you not have certainty with that?
I'm saying that I don't have absolute certainty.
Right. I'm saying, how do you not have
absolute about the meaning of the words?
Okay. I guess that's possible, but if we say that that's just the language, ignore the language and assess just the conclusion, like how can I believe I exist and be wrong?
Because the probability is greater than 0 that my concept of existence is mistaken, that I've just gotten confused somehow.
Well, my concept of existence is just the thinking. So the fact that I think means I exist. Those are synonymous, essentially. It's a tautology.
They're not at all, because people can exist without thinking. They're not even close to synonymous.
Right, there could be more to existence than thinking, but thinking is an aspect that demonstrates existence. So there are.
Well, that's still not.
It's
That's
like
not synonymy.
not all flowers are roses. Not all, but all roses are flowers.
Yeah, that's got nothing to do with what we're talking about.
All
though.
thinking is existing. You can't think and not exist. Even if you can exist and not think, you can't think and not exist.
We're agreed on that. My point is that I don't have any need to be certain about that. I can admit that there's some non-zero probability that somehow some malevolent demon is deceiving me about that, about the very meaning of the terms of my very thoughts, because it takes time to think the thought, and so a demon could be changing, my memory about what the terms mean, or what I said 5 seconds ago, or what the beginning of the sentence was like. But look, my whole point is it doesn't matter that there are possibilities like that. It doesn't make me a skeptic. I know that I think, and I know that I exist, and I know that thinking entails existing. I don't need certainty for any of those things. And I know I'm not in the Matrix, and I know that humans and chimps share a common ancestor, and I know that God exists, and I know that Jesus rose from the dead, and I know there's a heaven, and these are just claims that I assess in the same way that I assess every other claim. I don't need the distinction between appearance and reality is meaningless to this. The fact that Kant gave fancy names to that distinction that was in Plato 1700 or 2,000 years before that doesn't mean anything. I don't need appearance to guarantee its truthfulness about reality to believe on the basis of appearances how reality is. I know I'm not in the Matrix.
So I just consider that a confusion between the map and the territory. Like, that's just a fallacy. Like,
well, you can say that, but I mean, you got to break that down at some point. I'm telling you, you're really obviously big on this appearance reality distinction. Now, what I want you to do, Tom, is take me from the distinction between appearance and reality to these claims about evidence. I'm not seeing it.
So if I made a claim that the true nature of reality is this, and I'm using my perception to do it, my perception doesn't justify it because my perception isn't the true nature of reality. It's like...
see that? Let's stop right there. Because you just made this inference, as far as I can tell. Because my experience isn't identical to reality, my experience can't justify reality. I believe that's what I heard, and that is an absolute non sequitur. The devil's in the details, man.
How was that a non sequitur? That was just answering your question.
Well, my question was, take me from the reality appearance distinction to the skepticism stuff, and what I'm pretty sure I heard you say was that because reality and appearance are distinct, appearance can therefore not justify claims about reality, and that just doesn't follow.
So I'm saying it's kind of like the square root in the pork chop. I know you said you don't hold absolute certainty. Well, I do. I have absolute certainty you can't square root a pork chop. And
that's fine.
Like that, I would hold absolute certainty that our senses, or that we can't justify that our senses are describing reality. We know enough that our senses are not describing reality to justify the conclusion that any conclusions we come through our senses can't be justified to claim to be reality itself.
Okay, so we have a conclusion. The conclusion appears to be that sense perception cannot justify claims about reality.
Yes.
But you said earlier you believed that humans and chimps shared a common ancestor and things like that.
Right, so sense perception can justify claims about apparent reality, the map. We can use our sense perception to describe the map. We can't use it to describe the territory. Are you familiar with the map-territory distinction?
Yeah, I know the difference between a map and a territory.
So
I don't think it has any significant implications whatsoever, because the map is basically what you're saying is all we can know from experience is what experiences we have. And I'm asking you, why do you believe that? That's just plain old boring skepticism. Why believe skepticism? Give me an argument for skepticism.
Right. So the only thing our experience can tell us is what experience we have. I mean, that's literally what they are. Yes. The experiences we have.
That's what they are, but they can do more than what they are. It doesn't follow from what they are that they can't do more. The appearances and observations that biologists make justify for them the conclusion that humans and chimps share a common ancestor. Don't go anywhere. I got to plug in my computer when I.
Don't knock over the camera.
We tried this last time, Trent.
I know, man. But oh
my goodness,
my battery's running low. Sarah, help! Got to get my wife in here. This is like oh my God, it almost fell over again. I'm such a dad. Hey, help me plug in my computer. My battery's running low. Okay, so I'm going to scooch over more towards the thing.
Is this your computer?
I'm just plugging it.
Can you tilt it down a little bit?
Yes, my battery's low. Is that better?
That's a little too low.
Is that okay?
Yep.
I've lost my view of myself. I can no longer see myself. There I am. So I really want to. I want to do this just like it was a graduate seminar. I want to understand your conclusion, and I want to understand your reasoning for your conclusion. The conclusion appeared to me to be that no appearance can justify a belief in any reality.
So just to clarify, I'm not saying that our experiences are necessarily not descriptive of reality. I'm saying they
no,
could.
I'm just clarifying. Every time I ask a question, you go off into la la land.
So my justification is the exact same as Descartes, the exact same as Kant, the exact same as everyone who did that, who shows that the fundamental nature of reality may not be the same as our perceptions. All models are wrong. They're only probabilistic and useful. Truth isn't even a concept.
Probabilistic, I can get, okay? But look, the concept of probability is probability of truth. We say of scientific hypotheses, they're probably true. That's what probably means, is probably true. There's no such thing as like just probably. Probably means probably true. And true means as it is in reality. And experiences are our guide to reality. They're not infallible guides by any means. Sometimes they lead us astray, but they are the only guides we have. And I take it for the most part, they're fairly accurate, because I take it for the most part, the things that scientists teach us are mostly accurate.
Right. So
do you not believe that? Do you not believe that most of science is at least basically accurate?
It's an accurate description of our apparent reality. You can't say it's an accurate description of reality.
There's no such.
To quote George Box, for such a model, there's no need to ask the question, is the model true? If truth is by the whole truth, the answer is no. The only question of interest is the model illuminating and useful? Truth isn't a part of the question in science. There is no absolute truth in science. We don't even care.
That is a view called anti-realism. It is a minority view. It is not the view of most scientists, and I want to know why you believe it.
Because
why
most
are you an anti-realist?
Trying to point me as an anti-realist in some sense. No, I'm like most scientists. Most scientists admit, yes, we could be in the matrix. That's totally fine. We don't care about this kind of absolute truth that you're talking about.
I didn't say anything
about it. It's a different category thing.
Didn't say anything about absolute truth. You appear to me to be saying that appearances can't justify even that appearances cannot make probable claims about reality. That's exactly what it sounded like you were saying, man. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm not sitting here trying.
I've tried to explain this to you multiple times, and you keep.
Look.
There's a distinction. I make a distinction between two kinds of knowledge.
If you keep
tentative knowledge.
Words, I'm not gonna just like get it through repetition. Try saying it in some different words, like without using the words absolute truth or, without. Just try using different words. Maybe I'll get it if you use different words. It sounds like, so apparent reality, that's just got to be, appearance. That's just another word for appearances. Reality is the world out there independent of my mind. And when my descriptions of reality are accurate, they're true. Truth is not some mysterious thing. It's just it's like as boring as grammar.
Truth is not a mysterious thing, yet truth is like one of the most mysterious things in all of philosophy. Yes, it is.
Well, I just don't know people. I don't know people in philosophy who really think that. I mean, most people hold a deflationary theory of truth in which truth is actually fairly boring. I mean, truth is awesome in having it, but the concept of truth is very simple and in many ways very boring.
like Gettier's problems. Like, no,
That has nothing to do with truth.
justified true belief and how justified true belief doesn't
The
qualify as
definition
knowledge.
of truth has nothing to do with the definition of truth. The definition of truth that I accept is, and its connection to claims is the one I quoted from Aristotle earlier. It's when your description of the world is accurate, when the world is the way your words describe it as being. That's the only concept of truth I know. And the only way I know of forming beliefs about the mind-independent world is through the experiences I have of it. But I hear, and I'm a fallibilist, I'm a probabilist, a radical probabilist, and so I think that all of our beliefs that we form about, I'm an Aristotelian, all knowledge comes through the senses, and so I believe that our beliefs about the world are only probably true, like we can never be certain, absolutely certain of them, but I do think that there can be probable enough to know things, and again, not about apparent reality. Probably means probably true. If somebody were to say to you, do you think it'll rain today? And I say probably, and you say, but do you think it will rain? And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's nonsense. Yes, I just told you, I think it probably will rain. So the concept of probability is anchored to the concept of truth, and I think scientific claims are probably true, and that experiences give us evidence that makes probable claims about the world. And what I want to know from you that I can't seem to get is, do you or do you not think that some experiences make probably true claims about the world itself?
No. In the way that you mean it, no. In order to have a probability, you need a numerator and a denominator. The numerator is all of our knowledge. The denominator is nothing. There is nothing that goes in the denominator for the reality.
What are you talking about? There's no reality? What?
We don't have any access to true reality, the numeral. We cannot put anything in the denominator to come up with a probability in that way. No.
I don't understand the numerator-denominator thing, but you made a concrete claim about the numeral. Could you repeat that claim about the numeral, please?
Which one?
The one you just made. You said something about we can't have any knowledge of the numeral.
We don't have any access to any knowledge of the numeral. There's nothing.
How do you know that?
Because all of the excess of knowledge we do have, we know doesn't work to do that. There's lots of problems in philosophy that show it doesn't work, like the problems indicated by Descartes, and the problems indicated by the problem of the criterion.
Descartes didn't think that. Chisholm didn't think that. I ask you why you think this, and you name problems that don't have anything to do with that.
Except they do exactly say that. This is the numeral distinction. Descartes shows we can't have absolute certainty. We don't have the reality.
But nobody said anything about absolute certainty.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. You're asking about my position, which is
probable truth. I was asking you how we can have, if you thought we could have probable cause.
My answer was no, because you need absolute certainty. You need something in the numeral to put in the denominator to get a probability. And you don't have it.
But why think you have to have something certain to get something probable? Why think that?
Because you need something from the numeral to compare the numerator to, our knowledge. You've got to compare it to something with the denominator being something in the reality itself, which we don't have.
And I'm saying I don't see any reason at all to think that what you just said is true. Why would we have to do this idea of comparison doesn't even make any sense to me. I literally don't know what you're saying. It makes it's like 'twas brillig and the slidey toves did Gyre and Gimel in the wave. I mean, you're talking about numerators, denominators, comparing reality with reality. You're hurting my brain, man. I don't understand what in the world you're talking about. I'm talking about making observations about the world, taking in experiences, and coming to conclusions, just probabilistic conclusions about the way the world is on the basis of those observations. That seems pretty simple. And I can't even get you to go in for that.
Could we be in the matrix? Yes or no?
Yeah.
What do you call that?
What do I call what?
We could be in the matrix. I call that there's a probability, there's a chance we're in the matrix. So we can't be certain we're in the matrix. Right?
Okay, yeah.
So we're going to classify that. We're going to put that in a box and say all of those kinds of certainty claims, those are now in a category. We're going to give it a name. I'm going to call it the numeral.
The numeral is, you use the word numeral to refer to certainty claims?
I can call it bubbles. Don't care. We're going to call all of those kinds of claims about could we be in the matrix? And if the answer is yes, we can be wrong.
That's not a claim, that's a question. Could we be in the matrix is a question, not a claim.
all of the
You are
kinds of
losing
claims
me,
that can
man.
be in the matrix and be wrong because we're in the matrix. We're going to put those claims in a box, and we're going to call that box something.
I still don't even understand what kind of claims you're talking about. Tell me just
Any claim that we could be wrong about, ever, about anything. Any claim that we could be wrong about.
So why don't we just call those the fallible claims?
Okay.
I mean, that's what most people call them.
Okay. All right, so we're going to put those in one claim, and then we're going to put the infallible claims in another one. We're going to call them the infallible and the fallible.
And I'm going to
That's the
chuck
same
those out the window because I don't care.
That's the same distinction I've been talking about the entire time. The numinal and phenomenal. The infallible is what I'm going to call numinal.
A metaphysical distinction. Certainty and uncertainty is an epistemological distinction. They are worlds apart.
Great. I'm going to combine the two and put them in, say, the same categories. So we have the...
Well, that's just like an admitted confusion then. You can't just put them in the same category when they're different.
I'm trying to say, use different words to try and explain the concepts here, and that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to make a comparison here to try and explain this to you. It shouldn't be too hard. Most people get it pretty quickly, including philosophers. So,
yeah, well, they might appear to, but that isn't an infallible guide to reality.
If we could be wrong, and that kind of a claim that we could be wrong about is in the fallible claim. And if there's a kind of claim that we can't be wrong about, that would be the infallible claim.
So here's the argument I think I'm hearing. So I think I can put this into a simple modus ponens. It sounds like you're saying this. If it's possible that I could be, or I guess the fundamental principle is this: if it's possible that I could be wrong about something, then I can't know it. Or no, forget knowledge. If it's possible that I am mistaken, I cannot have any evidence.
No, just say if it's possible I'm mistaken, we're going to put it in a category and give it a name.
Well,
kind of thing.
Well, here's a question then, a related question. Do you believe that the fact that a claim cannot be known with certainty means that we cannot accumulate any evidence for that claim?
We can't use, like, we have the fallible and the infallible. If there's a claim, how did you phrase it again?
I said this. I said, do you believe the following proposition? For any given proposition P, if we cannot be certain about P, neither can we have any evidence of any probabilistic evidence with respect to P.
Right. So I would say that if we have a proposition P and we can't be certain about it, then in order to claim it is, I still don't know, use the word knowledge here. In order to claim it's knowledge, you need certainty, some kind of certainty class of evidence to justify it. To call it the
why do you believe?
And then I would say there's a lowercase k knowledge where it's probabilistic, and if you have probabilistic justification for it, then it follows into the lowercase knowledge category. So I agree. It's still knowledge. I agree with everything in the scientific worldview. We're just getting rid of all this kind of metaphysical stuff.
Hey, Bud, you got tons of metaphysics going on there. you got more metaphysics going on in this amount of time than anybody I've talked to in a long time. you got tons of metaphysics. So I still don't know the answer to the question that I asked you. Here is a claim, and I want to know if you believe it. Okay? This is like yes or no kind of stuff. For any proposition P, if you cannot be certain about P, then you cannot have any probability about P.
No, again, I would break those into two different classifications. I'd say probability is one and certainty is another, and they're different kinds of claims.
So is that a yes, you do believe that proposition?
I'm not sure. Probably not.
Probably not. All right. Well,
hey, let's do this. Let's move. I've been silent the whole time, but it's been really fun to just listen to you guys go back and forth. So I'm going to talk to the audience just for a second. So I want to move at this point to Q&A. So as they talk a little bit more, I'm going to start watching the live chat, and I'm going to start taking questions, and I'll start to feed them in to move the discussion along. But yeah, I'm going to pass it back to you guys.
Right. So I think the problem we're having here is a language problem where I can't explain to you clearly the distinction between how I break knowledge into two different classes of things. They're two different kinds of things, and you can say the word knowledge, which can refer to one or the other, and I call them capital K knowledge and lowercase k knowledge, which is a pretty common term in philosophy used many, many times, along with capital T truth and lowercase t truth.
It's just not.
Would you like me to send you the references? I have tons of references of this. I will do it.
Yes, I would.
Absolutely.
Yes, I would.
Absolutely will do it. Right when this is over.
I would also appreciate it. I mean, look, I already told you I knocked I'm very enthusiastic. My enthusiasm for how much I don't care about the concept of knowledge actually caused me to knock the computer over and like screw the whole thing up for 10 minutes. Okay. I don't care about knowledge. The very first thing I said was that these binary notions are virtually useless, that all I care about is degree of probability, and I'm trying to understand what your views imply about what I care about, because I think that the stuff that I'm caring about, probability of evidence and degree of belief matching it, is all we need in science or religion or anything else. So that's all I'm trying to do.
Right. I'm still at the part of trying to explain to you why I care about knowledge. So I do care about knowledge. It's important to me. And there's a distinction there in how I use that term, which is important to express. And if you don't understand that, there's no way for you to analyze how my position has implications to your position.
Well, I got to say, I know a thing or two about the theory of knowledge. So that's not the problem. I just don't care about it.
Well, right. I know you don't care.
Surely you care about the notion of probability, right?
Yes.
Okay, well then that's our common ground. Let's talk about probability and how beliefs become probable.
Okay,
I think beliefs become probable when we have certain sorts of experiences that correspond to evidence for those propositions. How do you think propositions become probable?
Let me give you an example. If I said I can hold infinitely many napkins, what finite number of napkins would make it probable that I can hold infinitely many napkins?
Well, it depends on what kind of being you were. If you were a divine being, then it might not take much evidence at all.
What? Like, why does the being matter? Like, I don't get it. So what finite number?
Because if you said, how many pounds can you carry? I need to know what your strength is. If you're talking about just an ordinary person, I can probably predict the limit of how many pounds you can carry pretty accurately. But if you're like, oh, sorry, I didn't tell you, we're talking about Thor, well, then the answer is going to change.
You remember that whole numerator-denominator thing I was talking about?
I mean, I remember you saying the words.
Right. So let's suppose you don't know that. You have no idea what kind of being I am. I say I can hold infinitely many napkins. What finite number of napkins will justify or make probable the belief that I can hold infinitely many napkins?
Well, each successive napkin would increase the probability by some unit. That's all I care about.
80 billion trillion?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Give me a number. Just 80 billion trillion. Let's say I can hold 80 billion trillion. Would that justify or make it probable that I can hold infinitely many? By what amount?
It would make it more probable than that number minus 1.
I'm okay with that, but give me a percent. Like, what is the probability of the truth of this claim that I can hold infinitely many napkins?
That would depend upon the priors, which would depend upon what kind of being you were.
Which you don't know. You don't have that information.
It's literally, utterly unknown?
Yes, all you have is I said I can hold infinitely many.
But how do you tell me? Like, do you look like this and you tell me? Then I think that it's overwhelmingly unlikely. If you tell me by writing it in fire in the sky, because you got to understand that the way the message is conveyed itself gives me evidence about the claim.
Right, and you don't have that either. All you have, the only pieces of information you have is that I claim I can hold infinitely many napkins, and I'm holding a certain number of napkins.
How did I learn that you claimed this? That I read
no
it
idea. You don't have that information either. You don't even remember it. I'm the Descartes demon. I just wiped it from your memory. You only have these two pieces of information. I claim I can hold infinitely many napkins, and I'm holding a finite number of napkins. That's the only thing you've got.
Well, then I wouldn't even be able to have the thought because...
Bingo! Wait. You wouldn't be able to...
There's no bingo.
Yeah. Go back. So you have two pieces of information. You have two pieces of information. I claim I can hold infinitely many napkins, and I'm holding a finite number of napkins. Give me the justification. Give me the number. What is the probability by any number of finite number of napkins that I can truthfully hold infinitely many napkins?
I just wake up, and the only memory I have, the only thought that I have, is that Tom Jump made this claim?
Person, entity, being X claims it can hold infinitely many napkins, and it has a finite number of napkins in its hand, give me the probability based on any number of napkins that it is true that it can hold an infinitely many number of napkins. You can't do it, can you? There's nothing you can do. If you don't have a denominator, there's nothing.
Hey, Tom, does x squared equal y? Huh? Does it?
It can. It's possible.
Gotcha. You can't tell me,
Right.
can you?
Right.
Bingo. Bingo.
That's the entire point. Yeah, bingo for me, because you just granted everything I just said. The numerator, my entire analogy is the numerator and the denominator. You need to have information. What? I can't.
I said I'm nice that way. I like to make people happy.
Can you turn your volume up a little bit?
Turn my volume up a little bit? Yeah.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Move close to your mic or something?
Well, I think it's right here.
Oh, okay.
I think this is my mic.
Yeah, you're sounding a little quiet for some reason.
Well, that would be unusual.
I can hear him pretty well. So let's move to questions. We're at the 9:30 mark. So let me just get to this question here. This one is from Josh Brister, Apologist Supreme. He says, can you ask T-Jump how his philosophy is livable? I guess that's directed to you, Tom.
Yeah, it's just as livable as anything else in science. Like, if you imagine a kid playing a video game, you can play the video game without knowing what made the video game. You just not even relevant information.
All right, this one is for Trent. It's from the Truist. He says, if your God is unobservable, how do you justify claims of observing it?
Same way I do with atoms.
Okay.
Make predictions, make observations.
All right, this one is from Kyle Alexander.
I like the Truist, though. That's a really cool name.
The Truist.
That's very cool.
This one is for Tom. Is it possible for you to be wrong about your claim that we can't know about the nominal?
Absolutely. There could absolutely be a way that we could discover that could give us information about the nominal that we don't have yet.
Trent, did you want to come back on that at all, or?
Well, I mean, it sounds like he knows an awful lot about this thing that nothing could be known about. That's a little curious to me. I would love to know how somebody can know so much about something so unknowable. That's a little bit of a puzzle. Because the only thing I've got, the only hypothesis I've even got, is that he subscribes to a proposition along the lines of no appearance can justify any reality claim. That's just like, forget it.
Well, I think that napkin analogy is really the closest we got to what my position is, and you seem
I hope not.
You seem to pretty much accept it once you got that napkin analogy. Because if that's
what I accepted was that you didn't give me enough information to take a judgment.
Exactly. That is my position. Bingo.
All right.
Okay, let me move on to another. I'm just trying to copy this thing over. It's not working. All right, let me just move on here. So this one is another one for Tom from Sergeant Slaughter. Isn't the claim we must have infinite knowledge for any claim about infinity self-defeating, since that claim applies to an infinite many of claims?
No. Triangle has three
Bingo!
sides. No. The triangle has three sides. That statement is not itself a triangle because it doesn't apply to itself. It's like the analytic-synthetic distinction. A.J. Ayer answered this question already in the empiricism. He said, no, it's the verification is not self-defeating because verification is definitional because of the analytic-synthetic distinction.
That was not where he ended up on that. I literally just wrote a chapter on this, and he did abandon. He admitted a lot. As soon as I just got the proofs for the chapter. When it finally comes out, I'll let Cameron post it.
Well, I know he abandoned it, but that wasn't the reason why.
Okay, let me move on to the next question here. This one I think is going to go back to Trent, and then you guys can go back and forth on it. This one is from Matthew 1. The question is, why can't we know that God exists through experiencing the beauty of nature?
Well, I think we can. I mean, but I think it's I think that is it's like kind of like a direct experience of God. I do think that an inference or an inferential process goes on in the mind. The mind's often making sort of unconscious inferences. I just wrote about that in this book, which is a really awesome account of the use of evidence and evidentialism. So I just wrote about this concept of unconscious inference and immediate inferences, and I do think that I absolutely think you can know that God exists just in virtue of experiences of nature. I got a story about how that happens in a paper called something like Reforming Reformed Epistemology or something like that.
Tom, what are your thoughts?
No, beauty can't indicate that there's a God any more than hunger can indicate there's a God, or itching, or hairiness. No.
I think all of those things indicate to some degree that there's a God. Because itching is a conscious state. I think every conscious state is some evidence that God exists.
Yeah, I agree with most physicists and naturalists and scientists to say nope.
It is not the case that most physicists think that.
Physicists think what?
That most physicists don't think that consciousness, or at least I couldn't tell if he's saying that there's no consciousness or that consciousness doesn't indicate God.
I think he's trying to say that. Yeah, I think he's trying to say that like most physicists are naturalists about the mind, like physicalists. Yeah.
I don't know whether or not that's true. It just utterly, I don't really care, but.
Yeah, so I think.
But that, I mean, look, there's a lot of
position.
freaking theists in that. I mean, there's a lot of theists in physics. In fact, what's interesting is that the more fundamental science you get to, the more theists there are. More theists in chemistry than biology, more theists in physics than chemistry.
We have a couple minutes, so Trent, why don't you just explain why you think that conscious states are evidence for God?
Because I think they are utterly inexplicable in terms of the physical alone. I think that, like, Jaegwon Kim did his level best to try to naturalize consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness just has not been cracked. It's been too tough for even the best minds. And I think if they were going to figure it out, they'd figure it out by now. It's just consciousness is something wholly other than nature. It just shows there's just reality, physical realities like Swiss cheese, because it's just shot through with billions and billions of minds.
Sounds a whole lot like an argument from ignorance. We can't explain lightning with all the greatest technology of 3,000 years ago. Must be Zeus. Genius.
Okay, moving on. So this one is from Midiwave Productions. This one is to Tom. What is the probability that a determinist can have knowledge?
No idea.
That's a weird question.
I mean, if you're saying, can a determinist have knowledge? The answer is yes. I mean, you could be determined by reality or truth to believe reality or truth, and therefore you would have knowledge. Probability, I don't know.
Anything to add on that, Trent?
I think if determinism were true, there would be nobody would have any knowledge. But I do think that determinists can have knowledge because, fortunately, their determinist views are mistaken.
Oh, I'd like to ask about that one. Why do you think that you can't have knowledge as a determinist?
Because if determinism is true for the reasons that it's usually taken to be true, naturalism, then there are no minds, and therefore there are no states of knowledge of anything by anyone ever.
Well, determinism just states that all events are predetermined. That's it. So our beliefs could be determined to correspond to reality by reality. So it seems possible knowledge is possible.
Well, all I can do is repeat myself. If you're talking about a case where the reality is the way it's typically taken to be to justify determinism, namely all-out naturalism, then there are no mental states, and therefore there are no belief states and no knowledge states.
So you're not talking about determinism, you're talking about naturalism.
I'm talking about the most common concomitant of determinism, the most common actually held worldview that includes determinism, which is naturalism.
Okay, but just strictly determinism, we could be determined by reality to believe true things. So it is
the question, I mean, Cameron can read it again, but the question wasn't about an ism, it was about an ist. It wasn't about what a proposition entails, it was about what a person might hold. And persons typically hold clusters of beliefs.
Right. So he said a determinist, as in the position of determinism, not a naturalist, as in
And somebody who is a determinist is highly likely to also be a naturalist.
Okay, so but you would grant that general determinism, it is possible to have knowledge.
I would have to know what kind of determinism the person was talking about.
I'm just saying it could be any kind of determinism. It's still possible to have knowledge.
I mean,
there's
like Calvinism.
lots of different kinds of determinism. There's theological determinism, logical determinism, causal determinism, physical determinism.
So I'm just saying any kind of determinism. It is possible to have knowledge if there is indeterminism. The category of determinism is broad enough to have knowledge.
Maybe.
Okay.
All right, Melissa Mitchell, question for Trent. When is personal revelation testimony, such as what Paul says in Galatians 1:12 through 16, considered reliable? And can you answer that without begging the question or special pleading?
I literally thought what was coming was, can you answer this question without getting so excited that you knock something over? Could you read the question one more time? I'm not really sure I got it.
When is personal revelation testimony, such as what Paul says in Galatians 1:12 through 16? Actually, probably go ahead.
I think all personal revelation is testimony in any case.
So this is Galatians 1:12 through 16. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. For you have heard from my previous way of life in Judaism how intensely I persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it.
Yeah, the testimony of Jesus. Sounds like to me.
What was the first part of the question?
So the question was, when is personal revelation testimony, such as what Paul says in Galatians 1?
And my answer was always. And the example that was given there, Paul's just saying, I did not receive this testimony from mere men. I received this testimony from Jesus himself. That's awesome. But it's still testimony.
I think by testimony, they mean evidence, like kind of like eyewitness testimony.
It seems like she's asking about she's asking like Holy Spirit type personal revelation.
Yeah, I think. Look, I've actually got a essay on this in a book called something Evidence and Virtue, edited by Tim O'Connor and Laura Callahan. And the second half of the essay actually specifically talks about the testimony of the Holy Spirit. And the testimony of the Holy Spirit's literally testimony. So personal revelation directly from the Holy Spirit is testimony from the Holy Spirit. So I think, again, I'm sticking with my original answer. All personal revelation is testimony, no matter what its source. Some testimony is really special. I mean, Locke and Aquinas are actually of exactly one accord on this, that revelation is essentially just the testimony of God himself. Pretty special testimony, but it's still a form of testimony.
So what do you think about that, Tom?
Well, I mean, I would agree that personal experience is absolutely a form of testimony, but I think my interpretation of the question was that when is personal revelation like a form of reliable evidence that would be accepted in a court of law kind of a question. That's what I thought they were saying.
She didn't say anything about court of law.
Right.
She said consider reliable.
Right. So I'm interpreting when they say testimony, I'm thinking that means like testimony as in a reliable kind of evidence that would be used in a court of law. That's what I think
There's lots of testimony that would not be allowed in a court of law that's deemed reliable. Like I could probably give you 20 examples off the top of my head.
That's just how I'm interpreting what I think they mean by the question.
I highly doubt that. I just think my guess is the idea is when your testimony is very different than your standard testimony, how then do you judge its reliability? And then the answer is the same way you would in any case. You depends on what your evidence is about the reliability of the source. If you think that the Holy Spirit has revealed something directly to you, then your probability that you should have in that proposition is just slightly more than the probability you have that it was the Holy Spirit. So the real question is, how do you determine whether or not something is personal revelation from the Holy Spirit? And that's pretty complicated. There's more negative tests than there are positive tests, but I don't think there's any special problem there. You just think, what are the You think about what are the conditions under which the Holy Spirit would say something. What are my prior probabilities about what would be said? How does that comport with the experiences I've had? You just think about it like you would any other piece of testimony that was novel in any other way.
All right.
Somebody comes to me and they say, hey, I'm a theoretical physicist, and I'm here to tell you that most theoretical physicists who have thought about it are theists. I'd think, okay, well, I've never had any kind of claim like that before. And so I'd assess my evidence that they really were a theoretical physicist, and I'd think, if they were, what's the probability that they would have access to this information? There's nothing really very special in a sense about special revelation. Methodologically, content-wise, sure, but methodologically, not so much.
All right, I want to move on here because there's three more that we'll get in here. Mordek 101 says, and this is to you, Tom, if we are justified in believing in quarks on the basis of abductive reasoning, why can't we also use abduction to believe in a godlike being behind existence, order, consciousness, etc.?
Well, like Trent said, I would be totally happy to accept that there was like Jesus rose from the dead, or that there was a designer for the universe. If you could actually make testable predictions with that, that's great evidence. I'm happy to accept that. I don't think you have, but that's definitely possible. I would reject the omni properties. I don't think you can show there's a all-powerful something, for the reason of the napkin analogy, because if you don't really know the qualities of the being, then the claim that it can hold infinitely many napkins is contingent, no matter how many finite number you have, on the qualities of the being. You have to know that first, or you can't answer the question.
Trent, did you want to say anything in response to that?
Yeah, it's just such a bad analogy because if you look at the way that theists who argue abductively or in a Bayesian way, it's just flat out disrespectful that people have gone to such efforts to cash out the concept of God. You got Swinburne's Coherence of Theism and his book, The Christian God, where they go into great detail about the nature of God. And the chapter that I think Tom most needs to read is the chapter called The Predictive Power of Theism in Swinburne's book, The Existence of God. Because he explains very well, maybe read it again, because he explains really clearly there how it is that the nature of God generates predictions. It's pretty simple. And so...
it's pretty wrong, too, like as most naturalists agree.
Well, it's got nothing to do, if it is wrong, and it might be, it's got nothing to do with the whole napkin or numerator denominator thing. It's got,
right.
If it's wrong, it's just wrong because the evidence doesn't support it.
To explain it.
It has absolutely nothing to do with it. The analogy of numerators and denominators and napkins got nothing to do with Swinburne's kind of theism or Swinburne's kind of natural theology. It's an absolute red herring.
Right. That was trying to explain my position. I was trying to articulate my position to you with that analogy. My position is that, like a being that claims it can hold infinitely many napkins, that would be like reality, and the finite number of napkins, no matter how many it is like the experience or the perception of reality. And until you know what the qualities of the being are, you can't assess probabilities of it.
Okay, that's okay. Okay. This has got nothing to do with any sort of natural theology that I've ever seen practiced.
All right, this one is from Maverick Christian. Ask Tom Jump how adding 1 to a set with Aleph null members increases its cardinality.
I would just link a reference to the mathematicians who just posted a video on it on YouTube who did in fact explain this, who are professional mathematicians who do this.
But you at least admit that's a radically minority position in set theory.
I have no idea. This is what the mathematicians say can be done. I'm just okay.
I promise.
So if you
there's a really good free PDF of the set theory book by John Pollock. If you Google John Pollock Technical Methods in Philosophy, the PDF's available online. It's a wonderful. I always use it for my first course I teach in set theory.
All right, this one is from Adam Does SE. This one is for Trent. What is Trent's Christian testimony? How, when did he become a Christian?
So I got born again when I was 16. I was, by 16, a burned out party boy, raised what I call pessimistic agnostic. My parents didn't know whether there was a God, but they sure hope not. And that was basically my position. I was tall for my age, gregarious, got into a lot of partying with college kids when I was like 13, 14, 15. It was crazy. So I got born again, came forward in an altar call when I was 16. Very precocious, asking a lot of questions, very curious. Then by 18, I was a ordained Southern Baptist minister, went to Liberty University Seminary. After that, then went back and just gradually sort of got really interested in history and ended up becoming Episcopal, looking at Eastern Orthodox Church, became Roman Catholic, but was evangelical for a really long time. And so it was just basically good old fashioned preaching the gospel that I heard for the first time. And I was like, wow, this is nothing I've ever heard before. And I resisted it and resisted it and resisted it and resisted it. But, like C.S. Lewis said, I got dragged kicking and screaming into the kingdom of God.
I got an answer for your question. In mathematics, infinity plus 1 has meaning for the hyperreals and also for numbers like omega plus 1 in the ordinal numbers and the surreal numbers.
Yeah, but set theory is not. The hyperreals and the surreals, there's lots of problems there. Those are not the. First of all, those aren't. We were talking about accountable infinity, so we were only talking about the natural numbers, and so what you're saying has no application.
All right, well, let's move into closing statements, and I want to give Tom the last word. So, Trent, take about 3 to 5 minutes, summarize your thoughts, and then we'll move into Tom's and then close it out.
Okay, I'm starting my watch because I'm so excitable that you'd have to stop me, and I wouldn't even have hardly started. So I'm going to look at my watch so that my enthusiasm doesn't get the best of me. What I would want people to take away from what I've said is that you hear all the time that you still hear this, like on the intellectual dark web, which I listen to a lot. You still hear these claims that like Christians are anti-science, or that theology is like radically different than science, or Christians are fideists and Christians don't believe on the basis of evidence, and Christians, that faith is belief contrary to the evidence and things like this. And I'm like, that doesn't fit my experience at all. I pretty much don't know people like that. And if you read this wonderful book, Faith and Reason by Richard Swinburne, you'll see that has really never been the tradition. And, the natural sciences took hold and grew up within a Christian worldview. And Stanley Yaki and there's one other guy, I forget his name, but there's some really good historians of science. Even Alfred North Whitehead admits this. Science arose in a Christian context where people believed that human beings were made in the image of God, and therefore they had minds that could comprehend the world, and that's what made investigation of the world both possible and worthy of doing, because you were thinking God's thoughts after you. And so it was my love of science that ultimately led me into theology. And not only did the Christian world really give birth to science, it's only within the Christian worldview that I think science will continue to flourish. And that as long as people embrace these kinds of skepticisms that Tom's embracing, which is a perfectly generic skepticism, it absolutely undermines science. You're left with this impoverished, milquetoast, watered down picture of science is just talking about our own experiences. And if you look at the history of the Vienna School and the Ernst Mach Society and all this, we've already been here, man. We've already been here. A sort of navel contemplating view of science that sort of builds, circles the wagons. Science will not flourish in that sort of skeptical, subjective world. It just won't. And I love science, and I want science to continue and to flourish. And so it's important to me that people continue to believe that the world is rational and intelligible and knowable, and that our minds were made to know the world, because our minds are in the image of the divine mind. And therefore, inquiry into the natural world through the natural sciences is almost an act of devotion. And it just hurts my heart to see science trivialized by these sorts of subjectivisms and skepticisms.
All right.
That was 3 minutes, and
that was not bad.
I've talked so much that I should yield my other 2 minutes because I just talked too much.
Oh no, I appreciate the conversation. Thanks for having me on, Cameron. Thanks for coming on, Trent. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think the closest we got to really understanding each other was the analogy at the end of the napkins. If all of our finite experiences and like the number of finite napkins we're holding, and we're trying to answer the question, can this being hold an infinitely many number of napkins? Like, is the being uncreated or something? If we don't know the properties of the being, well, then we can't answer the question. We just don't have enough information. It's an unreasonable question to ask. Is x squared y? We don't have the information to answer the question. So that is a description of my position. Now, Trent mentioned that there are descriptions of God's nature. I think those are fundamentally flawed. They're just essentially assuming what you want to assume. That's the same as every religion. But we at least got to an understanding that from my position, we don't know what the fundamental nature of reality is. We don't know the qualities of God. And so no amount of the finite number of napkins in our experience can justify claims about that being. It's just not enough. That is at least an accurate description of what my position is. And I'm happy we came to it. It was a pleasant surprise.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just close it out. I mean, we could literally go for 5 more hours just talking.
Dude, I'm ready. I'm hyped. I could absolutely go 5 more hours.
Well, I mean, we could extend it a little bit longer.
I'm not going to sleep. I'm too hyped up. I love this stuff too much. I love talking philosophy. I love thinking about it. I love trying to understand things. I will right now commit to staying after for as long as anybody wants to ask questions or as long as anybody wants to talk. I'm wired.
What do you got going on, Tom?
Nothing. I'm happy to stay too.
Okay. Well, let's just keep it going then. At least for
a
little bit.
I'm getting a signal from my wife. It is okay.
10 o'clock.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
What about another 15 minutes?
Another 15 minutes. Yes.
Okay. So just going back to the napkin analogy, that makes sense.
Oh, please, can we not?
It's the best we've got. Like everything else you liked even less than the napkin analogy. The napkin analogy is the best we got. So from my position,
I promise you, I liked nothing less than the napkin analogy.
Well, I can assume that's because it's the most accurate. So the napkin analogy, again, if I don't tell you the qualities of the being, you don't have enough information, no matter how many finite napkins there are, to judge the truth of the claim that the being can hold infinitely many napkins, correct?
Approximately.
So if the same is true from my perspective of reality, that we're trying to ask the question, like in the case of God, a God is an uncreated being. That's the same as saying you can hold infinitely many napkins. If we don't know the qualities of the God, we can't demonstrate.
That's not the same at all. There's no cardinality of an uncreated God.
That it's not created by another greater being?
Yeah, it doesn't imply anything about infinity.
Well, it implies that there are infinitely many other gods that did not create it. That going on infinitely, we'll never discover another God that created it.
So what?
It's like saying you got infinitely many napkins.
It's like saying there's no Santa Claus.
No, I disagree with that completely because we have reason to believe Santa Claus is imaginary since we know who created him, us. I would say God, we have reason to believe God is imaginary for the same reason, but your analogy with Santa Claus doesn't relate to the God example.
But do you think there are any extant dodos?
No, I think they're all extinct.
Okay, well, how can you? So you think there are no dodos? You think there are 0 dodos?
As far as I know, of all the kinds of dodos as we know them on Earth, yes, I believe they're all extinct.
Well, there's your negative existential claim.
Dodos are not claimed to be all powerful or infinite or.
Doesn't matter. The structure of the claim is a negative existential, which implies a universal scope of every object in the domain. You have to know of every single place in the world there is not a dodo there.
Right, and I could say we could be in the Matrix and the dodos could be existing all over the place, and I just don't know it. So I'm only claiming that in the context of our world, in the context of the laws that we know and can describe with science, there is no existing dodo. But could there be others? Yes.
Well, but you're violating the structure. I'm focused on, as a logician, I'm focused on the structure of your claim. I don't care whether it's napkins or dodos. You are affirming a negative existential, which implies universal knowledge of every object in the domain of reference.
Right.
Okay, well then if I say there's an uncreated God, then it shouldn't matter that there's I'm not saying there's no other. The idea that there's no other, yeah, right. If I say there's 3 books on my desk, I'm also saying there's not 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9. It's irrelevant. If I say there's one God, Yeah, that's right. I'm not saying there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. If I'm saying that the number of creators of that God is 0, 2 or 3 or 4, absolutely, totally, fundamentally, and in every conceivable way, irrelevant.
Right, and I'd say that only applies when you're talking about those kinds of absolute properties of all-powerful, uncreated, all-knowing, eternal.
Uncreated isn't an omni.
I would say it is, yes.
Why?
Because it's assuming that there isn't anything before it. You're claiming that there is by
So
definition.
what? There's no omni in that. There's no omni in that.
How is that not an omni? That's like you've existed.
How is it?
It's like saying you've existed eternally, kind of.
Or that it popped into existence.
Which would
and saying that it exists eternally, it could exist apart from time, and then you wouldn't have an infinite number of moments. Do you think the universe had a beginning? Like, do you think all reality? Do you think all reality had an absolute beginning, or do you think that there was never ever a time when there was nothing?
No, I would go with the never ever a time there was nothing.
Well, then you believe in an infinity.
Right.
Come on,
I agree.
man.
I agree. I say that's unsupportable. I can't support with anything. It's just an assumption.
But you just said you believed it.
Right. It's not. I'm not claiming it's knowledge. It's just a completely arbitrary.
I didn't say it was not. I didn't claim you claimed it was knowledge. But to believe it is to believe that it's true. To believe it is to believe that it's probably true.
Right. I have a fideistic belief in it. That's it. And I'm okay with that. If you have a fideistic belief in those
I
properties,
think you shouldn't be. I think that's flat out crazy and irrational. To just like pick it, you just literally just picked it.
yeah, I'm just using my arbitrary sense experience and saying I'm just going to extrude this on to infinity because I like it. Essentially,
That's not intellectually responsible.
I would say it is because I don't know. The correct answer is I don't know, and that's
Well, I don't know whether the number of stars is even or odd, and I'm not going to like pick a side. I'm not going to say odd because I like it because I'm odd because I like to play on words. That would be crazy.
exactly. Is I don't know, but if you're going to ask me, I'm going to pick odd. Okay. Let's pick
Oh my gosh! All right, that's your view, man.
All right, should we just end it now?
Well, we can certainly go on infinitely. I would love to. I'm certainly welcome. I'm available for having an entire discussion about infinities in set theory. And I bet I could. I know some other people who would probably be willing to have a roundtable discussion on set theory and infinities.
Did you read the book by, I forget his name, the guy who works with Peter Boghossian, who published a book about infinities?
I did, actually. It's pretty good. Okay,
So
I should. My kids are kind of waiting on me.
Yeah, it's okay. I also wanted to mention that for anyone watching who is like curious about getting Trent on, he's open to doing more debates, more dialogues. So,
And I promise I will behave myself better. I will set my stuff up better, and I will be less excitable. I promise.
Don't
All
do
right.
that. Make it less fun.
I don't know, man. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I'll get
right.
my act.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining me. Another live discussion, Capturing Christianity. And that's pretty much it. Just go to capturingchristianity.com to see the website. You can subscribe and get a free book. And yeah, see you guys later. Till next time.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Peace out.